Hey everybody, what is going on? It's PMOC at 86 Drive, and this weekend I decided to treat myself and rent this Porsche Cayman S. This is a 2014 Porsche Cayman S in Guards Red. It's the second generation of the Cayman that was based on Porsche's 981 Boxster platform. So like the Boxster, it is a mid-engine sports car, but unlike the Boxster, it has a hardtop roof. The Cayman S is powered by a 3.4-liter six-cylinder Boxster motor positioned right behind the two seats, and it makes 325 horsepower. The Cayman weighs about 2,900 pounds, so it's fairly lightweight by modern standards. So it makes slightly more power and weighs only a little more than my supercharged BRZ, and I'd expect it to just slightly edge the BRZ out in a drag race. But I'm not here to drag race. I'm here to experience the driving thrills of a well-balanced Porsche sports car. As you may know, I have a soft spot in my heart for mid-engine cars, seeing as I have owned several MR2s, Toyota's own take on a mid-engine sports car. If you're after the most dynamic and agile driving experience, nothing beats the mid-engine chassis. It's the layout of choice for the highest-end exotics and race cars, and quite simply, there is no substitute. So ever since Porsche brought the Boxster and Cayman into existence, it has been one of my dream cars. Of course, I could not afford one, so I had to look for a way to experience the magic of the mid-engine rear-wheel drive layout in a more affordable way. Check out my other video on my love affair with the MR2 if you haven't seen it already. Now, we've taken a walk around the car, and while looks are subjective, I have to say that in my mind, Porsche rarely makes a bad-looking car. Of course, the shape of the 911 is one of the most iconic sports car designs, and they are smart to never deviate too far from its classic lines after all these years. With the Cayman, they brought over many of the same design cues, but made it unique in its own way. There's a certain symmetry in the front and rear that speaks to its mid-engine layout. And in the case of this 981 Cayman, I would say it's perhaps the best-looking version of the three generations of Cayman that Porsche has produced so far. The latest generation actually doesn't look all that different, but I think this one hits the sweet spot with a timeless design that I think will age well and still look fantastic 20 or 30 years from now. Especially in this red color, it almost evokes a more Ferrari-esque styling, and you certainly get an exotic car vibe from the simplicity, the curves, and lines of this design. Honestly, I'm kind of in love with how this car looks. Alright, so let's step into the car and take a quick tour of the interior. The gauge cluster is very straightforward, with a tachometer in the center, speedometer on the left, and an information display on the right. You've got a touchscreen display in the center for your infotainment, and climate control below that. Now, this model that I rented is an automatic. It comes with the PDK 7-speed transmission. You can see over here a bunch of buttons. There's Sport, Sport Plus, and Sport exhaust. This car is also fitted with the Sport suspension. Sorry for the lousy camera work, but here you can also see the paddle shifters for the PDK transmission behind the steering wheel. The right paddle shifts up and the left shifts down. I won't point out every single detail of the car, but if I see anything interesting, I'll point it out. Porsche does come with a cup holder like it comes with two. Oh, look at that. What's neat is you can just have one of the cup holders out, and then you can close this again. Tidy. This Cayman S comes with the Sport Chrono package, and one indicator of that is the big clock that shows up on the center of the dash. I have no idea how to use it though. So, we're going to take this thing out on the local canyon roads and see how much fun we can have. I am really looking forward to this. Okay, we are headed out to Patterson Pass Road, which is a little side road here in Livermore. It's not a particularly great road. I've definitely driven it a few times, and I know some of my friends like it, but it's a little bit on the rough side and very narrow, so not one of my favorite roads, but it does take you out to a very scenic spot. And one of the first things I wanted to do with this car was take it out and get a nice little mini photo shoot going. So we're going to take it out here into the hills. This Cayman S is equipped with the sports suspension, which I believe is a static suspension. It's not really adjustable. So this ride actually is not that uncomfortable. It is, you do feel some bumps here and there, but I'd say it's still more comfortable than my BRZ when it was on race suspension. Probably not as comfortable as my MR2 on the Fortunato suspension. But yeah, I think it's somewhere in between. It's a nice compromise, I think. And now that we are heading out onto this road, starting to get a little twisty, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to sport mode, which I think for this car in particular probably means mostly a change in the throttle mapping, as well as maybe activating the sport exhaust. Yep, I can see the light is engaged on that, so gives you a slightly sportier sound as well as more aggressive transmission shifting. It'll tend to hold a gear a little bit longer as you're accelerating, so that's kind of the settings that you want when you're driving on a twisty back road like this. Not sure, I want to be cautious with this car. It does have a low front end, so these guys with trucks, they of course can pull over and stop just about anywhere they want. I have to be a little more selective about where I pull over. It widens up here nicely. Like this, where it gets narrow and there's sometimes blind corners, you almost are glad that you got a car that's bright red. I think it increases your visibility when you're out here, so that hopefully, you know, even if somebody's only catching a brief glimpse of you over a blind crest or around a blind corner, that red car, that red paint is going to stand out just that much more, and I think that's a good thing. See, it gets a little narrow again here, and we got a blind corner coming up, so I'm gonna slow down here, take it a little easy. Oh, I don't know if you heard that, but the transmission gave it a nice little downshift there for me. So far, I have to say the transmission is doing quite well in terms of shifting and being what feels like the right gear. Of course, I'm not driving super aggressive here, but I'm gonna start wondering whether or not it's even worth my time to start using the paddle shifters. The car does seem to be pretty smart about what gear it wants to be in. And in fact, I haven't even engaged the Sport Plus mode yet here. But as I understand it, that's even more aggressive. But since I'm not even pushing it that hard here, probably no point in, letting it rev up to 6,000 RPM or whatever. Spots here I can pull over and use as my photo op spot. This looks fairly okay. Let's try and take some photos. Okay, I'm driving here on Mines Road, and we're starting to get a feel for how this car drives. Oh, this engine sounds so good. A little bit of a burble on decel. As you slow down. Alright, I'm going to turn around here. Oh, very good turning radius. So let's talk about the PDK transmission. So far, it's been really impressive. I've been mostly driving around in normal mode and a little bit of sport mode. In normal mode, it's pretty smooth. and works pretty well. It puts down a decent amount of power, but is fairly conservative. It'll upshift early into a higher gear if you aren't accelerating hard, and keep your revs low for fuel economy and comfort. So if you're just driving around town, it's fine. But once we get out here on Mines Road, I think that we'll find that Sport Mode and Sport Plus are better suited for driving a little more aggressively. I don't know why exactly, but the sound of a flat 6 is music to my ears. I love the sound of this motor and the sport exhaust. I'm not even pushing the car that hard. Right now I'm taking it pretty easy as I get to know the car, and out of respect to the owner of this very nice car, I'm not going to thrash it and rev the piss out of it. But even driving it casually, I can feel that the motor has a decent amount of torque, and this car has more than enough power to get you into some trouble. I've gotten up to some speeds that are a little risque without even trying or realizing it. So 325 horsepower or so, I think that is very respectable for a sports car. I'm making a little less than that in my BRZ, and I'm already thinking that's plenty enough to get me into trouble. So the 3.4 liter motor in this Cayman S, I think it's very adequate. Do you want more power? Do you need the GT4 version, which puts down, I think, 385 horsepower? I personally don't think you really need it for a canyon cruiser or a daily driver. If you want that power to dominate on a racetrack, then sure, go for it. But you're spending a lot more money to get there. And what I'm saying is, this is plenty good for me. Save your money and just get a Cayman S, is what I say. Well, the throttle feels very responsive in sport mode. I think that is the sweet spot for this kind of canyon driving. When I put it into Sport Plus mode, it holds the gear and lets you get up into the higher rev ranges. But for my style of driving, when I'm not pushing it too hard, that's probably too aggressive for my taste. I think Sport Plus is probably best reserved for when you're on the racetrack or in maximum attack mode, which I just don't think is necessary when you're out here on a weekend cruise. That's just my 2 cents. The seats are pretty comfortable so far. They've got a little bit of bolstering to hold you in place when you're cornering. I'm a little on the chunky side, so I'm glad that the seats aren't too tight around me. When I got into the car, it felt like it fit me well right away, but some cars you get in and it takes a while to get things adjusted until you're comfortable. For this car, and with the BRZ as well, I felt like it was easy to jump in, everything just felt right, and you could start driving right away without having to fidget with the seating position too much. Brakes feel nice and strong, very linear. Years ago, I drove a Mercedes, and I really didn't like the way that the brakes felt on that car. They had a very strong initial bite, and it made it very hard to modulate the pressure on them. The brake feel was not something that I enjoyed on that car, and I was afraid that I hope all German cars aren't like that. So I was wondering how they would be on this Porsche. But so far they've been very good, very linear. begin this uphill climb on the backside of Mount Hamilton, you can really feel the power and the torque of this boxer motor. I believe it's a 3.4 liter 6-cylinder boxer motor. Naturally aspirated. And it sounds wonderful when you roll down the windows. Really hear that sport exhaust. So let's talk about the handling and steering. This is a great handling car, as you might expect from the Porsche pedigree, the mid-engine chassis, and the wide tires fitted to the car. This Cayman has 235 width tires in front and 265s in the back on 20-inch Carrera wheels. The car feels very responsive and is a pleasure to drive on back roads like these. The steering feel, however, it doesn't feel perfect to me. The 981 was the first Cayman to use electric power assisted steering, and not surprisingly, it was deemed not as good in terms of steering feedback as the prior hydraulic system. It does feel a little bit number than I expected. I had high expectations for a Porsche to have an amazing steering feel. It feels comparable to the steering feel of my MR2, but not as good as the feeling that I get in the BRZ. The BRZ feels nimble and lightweight, but the Porsche has more of a luxury or grand touring feel. It's only slightly heavier than the BRZ, but you feel the weight of the car that much more, if that makes sense. The heftier weight means you won't feel that the car is as tossable and agile as a smaller sports car. Don't get me wrong though, it is still a wonderful driving experience. So at the end of the day, I find myself asking, is the Porsche Cayman better than an MR2 or a BRZ? Yes, it is better in many ways, both qualitative and quantitative. Among the many reasons, there's the power of the motor, the crisp shifts of the PDK transmission, and the intoxicating sounds of the flat six motor and exhaust. This is a premium driving experience, that would be difficult to match or exceed in a cheaper car. So the real question comes down to, is it worth the additional cost? A brand new Cayman costs upwards of $70,000, perhaps more like $90,000 with options. A used Cayman like this one still might cost you around $50,000 to $70,000. The obvious answer is going to be, if you can afford it, then yes, it's worth it. The Cayman is an excellent car. But as I've noted in a previous video, used cars are holding their value right now, and it might be hard to get your hands on a well-optioned one in good condition. And if you want, say, 80% of the experience for less than 50% of the price, maybe you should look at these other cars as the better value options. Get a BRZ if you're willing to live with an FR layout that still handles great, or an MR2 if you've got to have the MR layout and exotic car looks. Right now, I feel like I'm in a very fortunate position of being able to own both of those cars. And they scratch that itch for a fun, reliable canyon carving weekend car, and even as a practical daily driver without breaking the bank. But I have to say, my time with the Cayman S has burned a lasting impression in my mind. I'm definitely saving my pennies for the day when I can finally afford to buy my very own Porsche. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you again soon. Truck. Hope he's not going left. Please don't go left. Oh no, he's going left.